That's the power of building these relationships that you can leverage towards accomplishing what your goals are.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to E101. Today's topic is networking for entrepreneurs, and I will introduce our speaker to you shortly. My name is Seema Gandhi. I'm part of the Entrepreneurship programming team. Today's lecture is part of the Lived It lecture, First-Hand Accounts from Experienced Entrepreneurs, and today's topic is networking for entrepreneurs. Andrew Yoshioka is the president, owner, and founder of Sanbonki Inc., a Mississauga-based management consultant startup. He brings the insight of 29 years of broad-based life sciences, industry, and consulting experience to his consulting assignments, which are focused on positioning companies for investment, partnership, and value growth. Andrew has positioned the business cases for over $8 million of development projects for government grants. During his 2 years as a volunteer mentor at the Regional Innovation Center of Peel, Andrew provided venture development guidance to dozens of life sciences, clean tech, and wearable and healthcare IT startup companies. Under his leadership, LSO networking events have grown nearly tenfold in average attendance, helping to create multiple business relationships and new partnerships. Andrew Yoshioka, sorry.
Thank you, Seema. So I got to put these glasses on or I won't be able to see the stage here. So tonight, the topic is on networking for entrepreneurs, and I hope to share some lessons learned from when I set up my consulting practice and how I went about building business into some new customer segments that I didn't even know. And how many of you were here last week and remember this slide? Yeah, so part of the objective of sharing these lessons learned is to prevent from encountering some of these with your own venture and your own business, because many of these things are actually preventable through your communication strategy, your networking strategy, your marketing strategy. As you'll notice at the bottom of the slide, there's actually URLs for most of these slides, so you can always refer to these later on. And there's also a reading list at the end after the questions slide. Most of those are going to be 3 to 5 minute blogs that you could read at any time, at any leisure, but there's also a fairly detailed one on a relatively intriguing topic too that you might want to check out. So, why do you think other people go to networking events? So this isn't about you, this is about the people that you're going to meet. Okay, so business development is, every networking event that I go to, there are probably other consultants, other people that are trying to sell product, and they're out there, making sure that they have the right kinds of relationships and connections to be able to sell their product, to find out about leads. Oh, so-and-so is doing something, you might want to talk to them. When people say, well, my business is ready for investment, oftentimes, part of that whole business of securing the investment is knowing who's got the money, having them know about your story. When they go and talk to other people and say, hey, I met this company, they're pitching for a couple $1 million worth of our investment here. What do you think about them? What do you know about them? Who knows them? And if you're operating in stealth mode, like the guy on the video was saying, nobody's going to know about you. So it's important to kind of get your business out there so that people kind of know what your company's doing, what you're working on. And that way, when the questions start being asked, you're at least in a position that other people can say, yeah, I've heard of them. They come to some of the events that I go to too. Or we travel in some of the same circles. And so that's the investor relations end of it. If you go to any startup competitions, you're going to see somewhere along the back, you'll probably see a bunch of well-dressed people, and they don't really interact with people so much face-to-face, but you see them kind of huddling after the presentations, and you realize those probably could be angel investors, and they want to kind of see how do people interact, because if you've got their money, they're wondering, do I actually want to deal with this person every week or every month for the next couple years until we get some sort of an exit? Because that's really what it boils down to, is the relationship of, if they've got my money, I actually have to want to deal with this person. And if they don't like you, you're not going to get their money, but also, it's just going to be that much harder. Corporate development, I would say, is a little bit along the same lines of investor relations and business development. And that's just really, promoting the awareness about your company. You're maybe not ready for investment. You may not be ready for a partnership, but at least if you've kind of been out there and people are understanding, we're working on this. In about 9 to 12 months, we're going to have some really good news. And so people are kind of anticipating. And if you actually do deliver on the timeline that you said you're going to, then people have some credibility in what you're doing because you said, this is what I'm going to do, this is when it's going to be done, and actually you met that timeline. Validation of ideas and market research, I think, gets back to that first slide, which was the top 20 reasons why startups fail. And getting out there and talking to your customers is really important. There's a blogger called Steve Blank, who's fairly common in the startup space, and he talks about startups being an organization that exists to explore, a reproducible and scalable type of a business model. And you just got to keep going out there, putting your hypothesis out there, getting some feedback, coming back, tweaking it a bit, pivoting, and moving forward again. How do you like it now? Until you get it right, because your goal is to try and create something that your customer actually wants to buy from you, not what you and your buddies think is cool. Finding partners and co-founders. Actually, last week, maybe if you were around at the end, somebody came by with a flyer looking for a co-founder. And that's, again, part of get your story out there. It created a little bit of awareness. I kept that flyer. I don't have a co-founder for them, but at least it's kind of out there trying to find the right kind of people that will deal with you the way you want to deal with them as well. And you want to, again, remember that your partners and co-founders have to be people that you're prepared to work till 2 a.m. with, many nights, many weekends until you get it right. Finding a job, well, that's probably some of the most common things that I find out there these days is that people can't find a job, so they come out, maybe I can join a startup, associate myself with a cause or a project that I find is interesting to me, and maybe that will result in a paid job. Ultimately, it boils down to relationships. And bottom line, as I've kind of put it there in strike-through font, they're not there. They didn't leave home saying, I can't wait to hear somebody pitch to me. Because that does sometimes happen at events where I go out there and somebody's like, literally, let me show you something on my iPad. And it's like, wait a second here. I'm prepared to be patient and kind of learn more about it because in my world, everybody probably is a piece of the puzzle. I don't know what puzzle they fit into yet, but I might be able to figure it out sooner or later. So this is one of these examples here. These sort of 4 bullet points about understanding who is in your network and prioritizing them and not burning any bridges is all just, again, about figuring out how do these pieces of puzzle fit together. So the man in the foreground on the left, he was at a startup in Silicon Valley, came back to Toronto, was looking to expand his network. And so eventually I was able to connect him up with another type of business venture that was fairly well funded and moving along, and he had some connections in the United States that were useful to them. The woman in the foreground there, grad student out of Montreal, came back to Toronto after she was done grad school. Her interest level was, how do I find a job that's related to what I did my degree in? I couldn't actually figure out where do these things fit until we had this one network event which was on cancer drug reimbursement, and I needed a bunch of cancer grad students who could actually understand the biology and answer questions for people who don't understand the biology. So I was able to call up 10 of them and say, come on out to this event. We're holding it in May at this patio event, and I think this will be good for you to get some exposure because it shows your expertise in your chosen field of study, but also it helps me accomplish my goal of delivering this networking event. Misunderstanding there's a pecking order. Well, I guess the easiest example of that is you run into the CEO of some company, Google, Microsoft, somewhere else. You say, hey, how about we go for coffee? I only need a half an hour of your time. How often do you think that guy gets asked that? A lot. And it's an imbalance in the equation here because, there's really no value proposition that you're giving back. They get pitched 1,000 cool ideas a week by people that kind of stop them on the street. But there's still ways of getting into those networks, which is around, like if you ran into Bill Gates and you said to Bill Gates, I'm really passionate about solving malaria in Africa, or I'm really passionate about solving HIV, he would probably stop and talk to you because that's interesting to him. And so you're coming at it from around the more direct approach, which is I've actually got something to talk to him about that interests him. Asking to receive before you give is kind of like, I met this grad student probably a couple years ago, very excited, said, hi, I just got my PhD yesterday. I defended my thesis. Can you help me get a job? And again, that was one of those, wow, how did that ever happen? Because that wasn't what I was expecting out of that interaction. Failing to state your value proposition. I think this is probably a fairly good illustration of this. This came out of CES just a couple weeks ago. And you kind of look at the two sides of the slide here. Same picture, same technology. But if you're having a conversation with people that say, well, we've got a BLE, we've got the accelerometers, the gyrometer, and we use open source software, people still have to figure out how does that fit with what I want to accomplish. And I found a couple quotes from people that had interviewed the representative from Intel, and they said, anybody who's building wearables can just basically plug this in, and it's now miniaturized, it's all fully integrated, and all you got to do now is figure out, is this a bracelet? Is it a piece of a brooch or some other type of jewelry? And it gets you into a completely different type of wearable segment because they get you the technology most of the way to actually having a product that somebody might want to buy. So figuring out these conversations about your value proposition is actually fairly time consuming. If you've got 10 or 15 minutes to tell somebody, you could probably eventually get the concept across. But wrapping it up into a fairly tight little statement like this integrated module gets you most of the way towards actually having a wearable product, it's very compact in terms of the number of words that you've got there, and people will get it because they can quickly latch on to how does that relate to them and their need. Get a social bank account. So this is, again, a lesson that I learned because when I set up my consulting practice, I was out there, I was meeting people, I was looking for consulting assignments. I never showed up to an event with a purchase order or a portfolio of here's your business plan, here's your pitch deck or whatever. But I was pretty keen on landing some paid contracts as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible. And it just wasn't coming. And so, people were continuing to still ask for help, whether or not I was going to get paid. And I think in the end, I had one of those moments where I just said, all right, let's do this. I will do what I need to do to try and help people to get what they need done, even if I can't get paid right now, because sooner or later something's going to result from this. And, it's sort of that paying it forward. It's challenging when you're kind of under pressure. You may be running out of time, you may be running out of money, you may be under a lot of pressure from some other people, like when are you going to start showing some revenue for this business idea that you've had here? But it may actually take you, the patience and the time of paying it forward by making connections for other people, because then you're not so much the outsider trying to break the door down, you're actually the central hub in all of this equation of connecting other people and knowing who's doing what and having these pieces of the puzzle that eventually fit together when somebody shows you the puzzle with the missing piece. What will they say about your company and how will you get them to describe what you want them to describe ties again back to your value proposition and what the speaker last week was talking about in terms of messaging. It's quite possible that if you've got co-founders and you kind of went away and you sat down and said, all right, everybody state the value proposition, you'll get 4 different answers. They'll be fairly close, but they won't be all bang on consistent. And if that's what your founders are doing, imagine your friends, imagine your family, imagine, you know, the investors that have maybe heard your story. They aren't going to have it anywhere near as good as that. So it does take time and an investment in, you know, just kind of continually telling the story till people kind of latch on to, okay, what are these guys working on? How is this going to solve somebody's problem? Why will people be interested? But you end up having a whole bunch of brand ambassadors out there for you and your venture that are telling your story. I have people pointing at me from across a room and they're talking to somebody else. So they're conversing like this, but then they're pointing at me and I think, well, I guess they're pointing at me. So people clearly understand some of the things that I do and some of the ways that I add value. So I don't have to spend a marketing budget on that. I've got people they trust telling them stuff about me. And you could have that too for your venture. So expanding your relationships, again, this is part of the whole lessons learned in terms of if you're not getting the kinds of connections that you need, you're going to have to go out there and find them. You know, like if you're looking for a certain type of connection and it's not at the places where you're typically shopping, you're going to have to ask around and find somebody who can tell you where should I be looking. And this is going to maybe take you out of your comfort zone. You know, I've been told, you know, programmers like to hang out with programmers. Okay, fine, but what happens if you need, you know, a wearables designer that's more on the kind of a look at this kind of curvy shape here and whatever, and we're going to plug all this hardware stuff into the back end of it, fine. But searching out these collaborations, so that again was part of that message from that little video clip of how do you operate like Silicon Valley, is collaborate. You know, if there are other parts of the technology community here that could help your business, rather than kind of trying to fight it out as a solopreneur, you may actually find collaborators that have the missing piece of technology that can get you somewhere faster rather than you trying to raise the money to build it organically yourself. And then reaching out before an event. Well, I sometimes go to these meetup.com groups. A meetup is really good because you actually see who's registered, who's actually going to go. And you've even got a picture of them. Sometimes the pictures are a little bit odd because there's a picture of their dog. And if they brought their dog to the event, I could figure out who I'm looking for. But otherwise, I just gotta go by profile as to, hey, does anybody know so-and-so because he didn't bring his dog. Having conversations with people do business with people that they like. And there was a lecture on at Ryerson last night. I couldn't go, but there's a professor that's published a number of papers on intentional networking for the purpose of, you know, financial or business gain can make some people feel dirty. And okay, interesting kind of turn of phrase, but when your connections happen on a natural basis because you keep running into the same people at the same types of events month after month after month, you might not call them friends, you might not have them to your place for a barbecue, but the fact is, I kind of know who they are. They're okay, I enjoy talking with them. So when some sort of a business opportunity actually arises naturally, you can have that conversation very naturally. Hey, I need a bunch of people to come to a networking event next week or 2 months from now because this is what we're going to do. Here's what's in it for you. Here's what's in it for me and the organization that we're trying to pull this together around. And so you have that kind of two-way street conversation, but it's because it all came naturally that I didn't feel awkward about asking, and they were happy to kind of come along with the request as long as it fit their schedule. And this building your network before you need it, again, it's about taking time. So if you think about investor relations, if you've been out there regularly kind of educating the investor community about your story months in advance, we're not ready yet, this is what we're working on, we'll probably be ready in about September of this year. They kind of know. And when it comes time to September, then at least you can say, this is what we did on time, on budget, and now we're ready to actually pitch to you for the story. Are you interested in hearing it? And they'll see if they can slot you in because you've been educating them all the way. Operating in stealth mode becomes really awkward when an investor picks up the phone and says, let me check with somebody that I trust. And if it was in med tech or wearables or something else like that, if they have a doctor buddy, they'll call the doctor buddy, hey, what do you think about this? Have you ever heard of this guy? Have you ever heard of the physician scientist advisors that he has on his team or his advisory board? They go, well, no, I don't know who those people are. They must be somebody else's network or something, but I don't know them. So then you've gained nothing, even though you had that opportunity 9 to 12 months ago to start building those connections out so that people knew what your story was and knew what you were doing. And then following up, I could do better at following up myself. I admit that. I'm guilty of that. I get business cards. I don't always follow up. But I typically remember, oh, I've got somebody's business card. And as long as I can figure out where did I put it and what's the opportunity, when the opportunity arises, then I can kind of link up and say, oh, I met this medical device company. They're actually interested in doing some remote learning stuff for webinars, and now I've got a customer that might be interested in talking to them about it because I've got that business card somewhere. This slide, it's got a lot of meat on the bone in terms of your effort allocation and your opportunity costs. You could spend no time, no money, or you could spend a lot of time and a lot of money. You often get these invitations on the email, come and attend such and such conference. Well, registration fee's $1,800. All right, you're a startup. What else could you do with that $1,800? And I weigh that out myself too. If I don't have the cash flow or I don't feel I have a client base where I can make back at least $1,800, I probably won't go, even though I would really like to go. It would probably be good for me for business development reasons. I just can't justify it from my cash flow. And recognizing what kind of connections you might make at a trade show. Well, if you're at the point of licensing your technology out, maybe that's where you do go because you've certainly got the buyers that are out there. They're looking for hot ideas that they can buy up, and it's just more efficient for them, especially when you go to an event that actually has these organized speed networking functions in that they'll give them kind of like 10 minutes each to sit across a little round table, pitch the idea. You're not going to sign a deal that day, but at least they'll know about your story. And because they've heard 30 stories that week, they'll come home from that trip and they'll say, your venture was number 1 or 2 out of the 30 that they heard, and they'll call you back. The whole objective of that face-to-face little speed event was get a call back, get another opportunity to tell the story in more detail. Business groups, board of trade. My experience with board of trade events have been kind of frustrating because I get a lot of business cards from real estate lawyers, mortgage brokers. I don't need either of those. I've already got my house. And I continue to get Christmas cards from them as well. So, it's just connections that I don't really need, but that tends to be the crowd that hangs out there. Now, if you happen to have some sort of e-commerce site pitched at the real estate community, I would go to Board of Trade. You're going to find tons of people that are out there looking for solutions for their problems. Meetup, I just kind of give the example from before, is it's really good because you can actually see who's coming to the event And then you can kind of prioritize who might be, your top 5 people. I want to hunt those people down. I might not be able to get to all of them, but I want to get to some of them. Hackathons and startup events, they're good and bad in my view. There's a lot of energy, excitement, innovation happens. But at the end of the Sunday night, I think a lot of these teams just kind of implode. They just dissolve away. People don't stay in touch. Sometimes they do. I was talking to somebody the other day, and if there's developers in the audience, maybe you can talk to me later, because they actually won a little startup event a few months ago, and now they're looking for a developer. So they gave me a job description by email. It's a little bit vague, but at least I can maybe make the connection for you. Speed networking. I think the purpose of speed networking really would be, if you don't even like them in the first minute, you're definitely not going to like working with them for the next 2 years. But you might like them for the first minute, and you're still going to find out, well, bad move, but it's really just the kickoff kind of an event of, what interests you, what makes you tick, how are you under stress, or whatever you want to talk about in a speed network. But even 3 minutes, you may be able to form some impressions about people. Pub nights, I just kind of put that down there because that was one of those types of events that we were running through Life Sciences Ontario. Was the first few pub nights that I went to in 2012, there were 5 people, me, 2 other consultants, the guy that was kind of the executive director of the organization, and a student volunteer. And I thought, why am I spending my time showing up to this thing? Like, I keep meeting the same 4 people. This isn't good. But they asked me to actually organize these networking events, and I don't know. I guess I had enough of a critical mass of connections and an attitude about just get things done to start, creating a network and community of people, inviting other people to come, kind of show up at this event and convene. And we've now built it up. We're averaging about 100 people per event, and it's a different sector of people every time because we often partner with other organizations. And in figuring out, well, what's the value proposition of these events to the people that are actually attending, it again ties back to, it creates a fairly relaxed social setting where people can get to know one another, such that when the time comes to do business, they already know these people, or they know a critical mass of people, and they know who they can ask at the event. I'm looking for this, do you know anybody? And they can point across the room. Social media. I was at an event put on by the Globe and Mail probably about 2 months ago. It was on small business. And they had a speaker from, I think it was LinkedIn. LinkedIn did some kind of intelligence to pull their network and find out, how do people use these different types of social media? And as you would expect, Twitter is kind of there for entertainment purpose to some extent, but also to at least make people aware about certain things. Facebook typically is, this is my network, these are my people. I don't really want you hacking into my people. This is where I tell people about fairly personal stuff. But LinkedIn is predominantly the social network for business to business. And so just recognize that people's LinkedIn connections are part of their most valuable asset. They've spent a lot of time building those relationships and building up the trust of those people. I think I've got about 630. I don't know all of them personally now, but I could probably figure it out. Where did I meet them? How do they all fit into this little puzzle here? But I probably am pretty close to about 100, 150 that I could tell you just off the top of my head. And so having command of that, but also having control of it, is pretty critical to me. So when people kind of, hi, I'd like to connect to your LinkedIn, it's like, who are you? Like, give me some value proposition, give me some win-win. How can what you want be valuable to me? How can what I have be valuable to you? I got one of those requests today, somebody that said, I'm sorry I can't come to your event tonight, but I'm looking forward to seeing your slides. How was that for networking? I thought, well, okay, not great, not bad. But I looked up his profile. It turns out, okay, he's been in business about 5, 10 years. He's got some stuff going on. I kind of understand the 2 or 3 main things that he does. And then I wrote him back and I said, here's what I think might be of interest, both to you and to me, is I have some customers that are in the kind of space of wearables, fitness, and sports. And that might be a sector that you're in because you are an enthusiast, you're also a marketer, and I think some of these ventures could benefit from getting some really tough love from you to say, I'm an enthusiast, I do this, I do that, your technology sucks. You need to hear that from time to time, and you need to go back to the drawing board and say, what could I do to satisfy this potential customer? Because he's not the only one that would say that, he's just the one that's in your face right now. And he may end up picking up some paid assignments out of this, who knows, I'm not really sure. But this is, again, typical kind of a win-win kind of networking of I pitched it back to him of here's my proposition to you. It's a hypothesis. It could be totally false. It's up to him to tell me, no, that doesn't interest me. I got to try harder at making that connection. Even though he reached out to me, I kind of threw it back at him with what I thought might be of interest to him about my network. In terms of benchmarks of success, I think it's just to try and be realistic. If you're at some sort of an evening networking event, it's on for an hour or 2, I try and come back with 1, preferably, but possibly 2 to 3 to 5 other good connections or leads or little tidbits of information that I can figure out in the coming weeks. How does this all fit together with what I'm trying to accomplish or connecting other people to other people? So don't go and try and hand your business card out to everybody because nobody will know who you are because you spent no time actually establishing any type of a personal connection with them. So this is just a kind of interesting example. I thought, oh, let's look around, see, if there's anybody that's kind of at the pinnacle of the business world, that I might have any connection with. How close is my connection? Well, I'm a 3rd level connection here. Now, my 1st level connection, Tom, I've known probably 40 years. And Tom would probably do almost anything that I would ask of him for the right reasons. But if you come up to me tonight and say, hey, can you ask your friend Tom to connect me to somebody, to connect me to Melissa Mayer? What am I going to say? Again, because we just met, I don't really know what your story is. I don't know what your venture's about. I don't know how that would benefit the people at Yahoo. And so that, again, ties back to an earlier part of the story, which is, what's your value proposition? How does this all fit into a need that a company like Yahoo might actually have? Because as much as I might be willing to make that connection to my longtime friend Tom, we got to still figure out, he's got to have enough of a good message that he can pass it on to the people who then pass it along and kind of get it in front of Melissa there as to what the issue is. So these are some metrics. This is kind of part of my story. 2012, Peel Rec Center volunteer, as Seema had said, I had 80 connections. Most of those were people that I knew since high school or university. And then there was a variety of pharmaceutical industry people that I connected with. When I had a job in the industry, I didn't need LinkedIn. And it was probably, I don't know when LinkedIn started, but it was not really all that interesting or important to me because I had everything that I needed to get my job done on a day-to-day basis. And that may actually be something that you find as well. If you're trying to tap into somebody that's at an established company, you might not even be finding all the right people at those companies, because if they're not looking for a job or they're not looking for connections, the person that you actually want is sitting down the hall from the person who actually is on LinkedIn. So in 2013, I had a couple of connections or collaborations with some other consultants that I knew in my network, and we started working on some business. My connections level at LinkedIn was expanding, but most of my paid business was still coming from people that I knew for a long time. And then last year, it's finally started to actually come to fruition that all those little connections and connectors that I had made with these different groups and networks has now resulted in a big part of my business, repeat business even, coming from customer segments that I didn't even get into in 2012. I knew that they existed. I had no connections. I had no way in the door. Nobody knew me. Nobody trusted me. But it's taken that amount of time to build it up. But I've been patient about that, and now I'm kind of seeing the fruition of that with, you know, the volume of sales that are coming, and even the further connections now, because any event, somebody says, hey, I'm looking for this. Do you happen to know anybody that does blah, blah, blah? Well, yeah, actually off the top of my head, I can think of 3 people right now. Let's talk about whether this connection makes sense, because I'm not just going to give them to you until I understand what your story is and what the win-win might be, so that I can tell the people somebody came to me with a win-win proposition that you might want to hear about. This was just really to visually break up the presentation. It's another one of these blogs that's online there, but it's just around how do you kind of crack in here when you're not really sure how to go about doing it. It just takes practice. You just try it out. You might not be great at it the first time. Keep trying again. This is one anecdote that I'll kind of give here, again, of just building a network and connections of people. So the lady on the left had done grad school in Montreal, was working at Ontario Brain Institute at the time, but now works for the Canadian Centre for the Commercialization of Regenerative Medicine. That's a really long acronym. Wow. But you know, she came to this event because I had been trying to organize another type of function with another industry partner organization. It took me 2 years. These were the kind of latest cohort of volunteers that were organizing for that group. So her and Anne-Claire, that were second on the left, were actually the new type of volunteers that were running that organization. We finally found an event where what we wanted to do and what their organization wanted to do all fit together, and we were able to work out the logistics. Stefano I've known since about 2012. He just keeps coming to these events. He's just part of the network and the ecosystem. He's never asked me for anything, but you know, I think from time to time he's kind of doing you know, some accounting work for early stage companies, always looking at how he can kind of help in that ecosystem. Natalie, who's in the middle, is a volunteer with Life Sciences Ontario, but she's also now working at a company called 6 Degrees Medical Consulting. And so she helped us organize these events. The guy next to her is Renee. Renee did a postdoc at CAMH in mental health, and now he's working at Weston Brain Foundation. So again, all these people kind of come together in the network. They show up at different times, they have different needs, but you know, knowing what they're doing and how they all fit and what might be of interest to them is just again part of having that knowledge of what you and your network can do for them and what they could do for you. And then Herman, who's on the far right there, I've known him since we worked together at YM Biosciences probably 7-8 years ago. So now all these people now know each other, and it's just through showing up at events, getting to know each other socially, and all the kinds of business connections are now relatively easy because it's doing business with people that you already know. So, you know, that's kind of wrapping up the whole lessons learned in terms of your networking. I wanted to kind of look at again these list of things. No market need at the top, 42%. Our goal is to try and prevent that from happening with your venture. And that really is what, you know, getting back to what Steve Blank says, get out there and talk to customers, and then talk to more customers. Because the answer is actually outside with people that maybe you don't even know right now, but you just keep sticking the idea out in front of people and testing the hypothesis and getting feedback and doing little tweaks and pivots and stuff until you get it right, because then you're actually not going to be part of that 42%. Ran out of cash is probably preventable if the idea is any good, but it's going to require, again, seeding the network, letting investors know, letting other people know what your business is doing, because that way you're not kind of tied into the, oh my goodness, we're just about out of cash. Can anybody help us find money? It's like, it's too late by then. Not the right team. That's, again, part of the people skills stuff. If you're doing stuff with only people you like, but they don't have the right skill set, then go out and find other people who do have the right skill set. Or if your team has conflict, well, some of that might have been predictable, but you know, it's just, again, getting to know people and understanding what they're about. I won't go through all the rest of the bullet points here, but just to illustrate, these top 20 reasons are largely preventable if you have the right kind of communication strategy, marketing strategy, networking strategy. It really is around what are you trying to accomplish, and how much will interacting with other people actually fit into that, whether it's investment, whether it's business development, whether it's sales, whether it's finding co-founders or something else. It's just, that's the power of building these relationships that you can leverage at some point towards accomplishing what your goals are. So that's the talk tonight. Thanks very much. And I'll take some questions.
Hi there.
Hi.
I'm Katie Way. I'm
Hi.
a lawyer and fairly new to the startup community. And what I've noticed so far is that there's pockets of networking events, like the meetup events. But it seems very hard to go from one pocket to the other because it's very hard to find. Do you have any sort of insight into how to go about finding those networking events and how to connect with more people?
That's a good question. I think some of it is just strictly about Googling online. And Google's fairly powerful these days. So if you give it the right terms to work with, like if you said networking for developers in Toronto, and you might even plug in a date, you might actually find some hits of yet another hackathon or yet another meetup group that you hadn't heard about, because they're sprouting up all the time. And then the other thing is, I think, just ask people that are at the network, where else do you go? What other types of networking events do you go to? What kind of law do you practice?
I do mostly business and IP law, intellectual property law.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, Andrew.
Hi.
Hi. You talk about using networking to do market research. Can you elaborate on it, please?
Okay, so I would say on an informal basis, it's going to be fairly unstructured, because if you go to an event that's all developers, they'll give you the developer's view of the world. And not to belittle that concept, but if you had an elephant and you closed your eyes and you were feeling, you would feel different parts of the elephant, and everybody would have a different impression of it. So for example, accountants think this business has an accounting problem. Engineers think, no, this is an engineering solution, and so on. So you got to just recognize that if you're doing some sort of informal polling at some sort of an event, that the feedback you got is going to have some level of bias by the attendees that are actually there. Now, if you happen to be at a huge event where it's fairly random, like you go to the Ontario Centres of Excellence Discovery event in May, where there's 2,500 people, chances are you'll find soup to nuts. So if you did a random survey there of people that walked past your booth or people that you ended up kind of stopping in the hallway, I'm sure you could get some reasonable sampling of what's out there. But are they the segment that you actually want feedback from? I don't know. So it would be fairly informal. And I think if you were going to do something, you'd want to kind of limit it to one or two critical questions that you could kind of have on your iPad and say, question one, is it A, B, or C? Okay. Question two, A, B, or C, fine. Thanks very much for your time. So you're not really intruding upon anybody, but you're getting some feedback from people about validating of an idea. So does that answer the question?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.